I'm Olivia Reynolds, 34, and the art studio I spent 5 years perfecting became the center of a family war I never saw coming. When my sister Rebecca's husband walked out, my parents decided my creative sanctuary would make a perfect emergency home for her and 3 kids. They didn't realize I'd already signed lease papers for my Florence adventure. The look on their faces when I finally told them still haunts me at night. Let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if family drama hits close to home for you too. The relationship between passion and practicality had always been a tightrope walk in my family. My journey as an artist began in childhood with crayon masterpieces proudly displayed on our refrigerator. But it wasn't until I turned 26 that I dared to pursue art as an actual career. My parents, both practical Midwestern accountants, viewed my artistic ambitions with thinly veiled concern. "It's wonderful to have hobbies," my mother would say while subtly sliding community college brochures for business degrees across the dinner table. Despite their reservations, I persevered through art school, working double shifts at a local coffee shop to pay tuition and rent. By 29, I had saved enough for a down payment on a modest 2-bedroom bungalow in a transitioning neighborhood of Milwaukee. The house itself was nothing spectacular: cracked tiles in the bathroom, outdated kitchen cabinets, and carpeting. That had seen better decades. But what sold me instantly was the detached garage with its high ceilings and northern-facing windows. Perfect natural light for an artist's workspace. Over 3 years, I transformed that neglected garage into my dream studio. Every spare dollar went into the conversion. Insulation for Wisconsin winters, proper lighting, custom-built storage for canvases and supplies, a small kiln for my ceramic experiments, and the vintage drafting table I found at an estate sale. That became the heart of my creative space. My hands bore the calluses and paint stains of this labor of love. I laid the bamboo flooring myself, installed the sink with help from YouTube tutorials, and painted the walls the perfect shade of calm ivory that wouldn't interfere with color perception. "You've created magic here," my best friend Mia declared the first time she saw the completed studio. She wasn't wrong. The space vibrated with potential and promise. This wasn't just a room. It was the physical manifestation of my commitment to my art, a declaration that I belonged in the creative world. My sister Rebecca viewed my life choices with a mixture of confusion and subtle condescension. 3 years my junior, she had followed our parents' implied life script with precision: college degree in business, marriage to James, a successful medical equipment sales representative, at 26, and 3 children in quick succession: Emma, Liam, and Charlotte. Her colonial-style home in the suburbs came complete with a 3-car garage, membership to the country club, and professional family portraits updating their Christmas cards annually. "It must be so freeing to just focus on yourself," she once commented while bouncing Charlotte on her hip during a rare visit to my studio. The statement came wrapped in a smile, but landed like a subtle accusation. In our family's unspoken value system, Rebecca was winning at life while I was still playing with paints. Yet something unexpected happened in the past year. My dedication began bearing fruit beyond even my optimistic expectations. A series of mixed media pieces exploring female resilience caught the attention of a respected gallery owner. This led to my first solo exhibition, which sold out completely. Art critics actually wrote about my evocative use of texture and negative space. Suddenly, my name appeared on lists of emerging artists to watch. Invitations to group shows in Chicago and New York arrived in my inbox. Then came the email that changed everything: an opportunity for a year-long residency program at a prestigious art institute in Florence, Italy. The acceptance came with studio space, a modest stipend, and the chance to study Renaissance techniques under masters while developing my contemporary vision. It was everything I had ever dreamed of, but never truly believed would happen. The practical considerations were daunting. I couldn't afford to keep paying my mortgage while living abroad. Selling felt premature. This house contained my history and future. The solution came through Clara, a local art teacher looking for a temporary place while her own home underwent major renovations. We connected through mutual friends in the art community, and the arrangement seemed perfect. She would care for my home, water my overgrown collection of houseplants, and even use the studio to create her own work between teaching assignments. The lease agreement we signed was straightforward, 12 months with an option to extend if. My residency continued. Clara paid 3 months' rent up front, providing me with crucial funds for travel expenses and settling into Italy. We spent an afternoon going through the quirks of the house, the back door that needed a special touch to lock properly, the temperamental water heater, and the location of essential house documents. "This space has beautiful energy," Clara remarked, running her hand along my workbench. "I'll honor it while you're gone." As my departure date grew closer, I felt increasingly protective of my plans. I told Mia and a few close friends about Florence, but kept details vague with family. My parents had finally begun acknowledging my artistic accomplishments, but their praise came tinged with surprise, as though they were complimenting a child who unexpectedly solved a difficult math problem. Sharing news of the residency would invite questions, opinions, and potentially dismissive remarks about gallivanting around Europe. I decided to wait until arrangements were finalized before making a formal announcement. Little did I know this decision to protect my joy would soon collide with a family crisis none of us saw coming. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was packing up supplies I wouldn't need in Florence. My mother's voice carried an unusual edge as she requested my immediate presence at their house for an emergency family meeting. "What's happened? Is everyone okay?" I asked, immediately thinking of health scares or accidents. "It's about Rebecca. Just come as soon as you can," she replied before hanging up. The drive to my parents' suburban home took 30 minutes that stretched with anxiety. Their driveway was full. Rebecca's minivan parked haphazardly behind my father's sedan. Inside, the atmosphere felt thick with tension. My mother's eyes were puffy from crying, while my father paced the living room with unusual restlessness. Rebecca sat curled in an armchair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. In the adjacent den, I could hear the sounds of cartoons and the occasional squeal from my nieces and nephew. "James left," Rebecca said before anyone else could speak. Her voice sounded hollow, detached. "He's been seeing someone from work. They're moving to Phoenix together." The revelation hit like a physical blow. James and Rebecca had always been the perfect couple in our family narrative, the benchmark against which all relationships were measured. Their marriage was supposed to be unshakable. "When did this happen?" I asked, settling beside her on the arm of the chair. 3 days ago. He didn't even have the decency to pack his things when I was out. Made me watch him load up his car." Rebecca's eyes remained fixed on the carpet. "He said he's been unhappy for years. Years. And I never knew." Mom brought tissues and herbal tea while Dad continued his agitated pacing. "The worst part," he interjected, "is that James canceled their joint credit cards before telling her. Left her with practically nothing in the checking account. He's paying for his girlfriend's apartment while Rebecca can't even make the mortgage payment this month," Mom added, her voice rising with indignation. I placed my hand on Rebecca's shoulder, feeling the slight tremor running through her body. Despite our complicated relationship, seeing my sister broken open this way hurt in places I didn't know could feel pain. "The kids don't understand why Daddy isn't coming home," Rebecca whispered. "Charlotte keeps asking when he's coming back from his trip." "You'll stay here tonight," Mom declared, reaching for the phone. "I'll call Nancy from church. Her husband's a divorce attorney." The next hour unfolded with intensifying urgency as the full extent of Rebecca's situation became clear. James had systematically prepared his exit for months, transferring savings, establishing separate accounts, even consulting lawyers about minimizing his financial obligations. The family, home Rebecca had been so proud of, was underwater on the mortgage after a recent refinance to pay for landscaping and a pool. Her part-time job at a boutique wouldn't cover even basic expenses for herself and 3 children. What about child support? I asked. Dad shook his head grimly. That will take time to establish legally. And knowing James, he'll fight for the lowest possible amount. He actually suggested I sell my engagement ring to cover expenses until I figure things out, Rebecca said with a bitter laugh that transformed into a sob. My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Something practiced and meaningful? We've been discussing solutions, Mom said carefully. Rebecca and the children need stability right now. A safe place to regroup while the divorce proceedings begin. Of course, I agreed. Have you thought about the guest room here? Or maybe converting Dad's home office temporarily? Another look passed between my parents. Our house isn't suited for 3 active children, Dad responded. The stairs are too steep for Charlotte, and your mother's knees couldn't handle the extra work. Mom nodded emphatically. What we need to consider is utilizing available family resources. In times of crisis, families need to come together with creative solutions. A subtle shift occurred in the room's energy, the focus pivoting from Rebecca's emotional support to practical arrangements. I felt an undefined pressure building beneath the surface of the conversation. I can help financially, I offered. The gallery show did well, and I have some savings I could. That's generous, Olivia, Dad interrupted. But this isn't just about money. It's about providing a safe haven for your sister and those children. A temporary home situation. The word temporary hung in the air with unexpected weight. I'll be traveling soon, I mentioned cautiously, not yet ready to unveil my Italian plans amid this crisis. But maybe when I get back, we can look at longer-term options for traveling? Mom's eyebrows lifted. Now? When your sister needs support? Rebecca looked up for the first time, her eyes reddened but suddenly alert. Where are you going? It's just some art-related work, I replied vaguely, feeling the bright joy of my Florence opportunity dimming under their scrutiny. Nothing finalized yet. The sound of something crashing in the den provided a welcome interruption. Mom hurried to check on the children while Dad gave me a long, appraising look. We should all take some time to think about how we can best support Rebecca during this difficult transition, he said finally. I'm sure everyone will make the necessary sacrifices. The meeting concluded with no concrete plans, but as I hugged Rebecca goodbye, she whispered, "Thank you for being here," with such genuine gratitude that I felt a twinge of guilt about my undisclosed plans. The drive home was filled with competing emotions, sympathy for my sister, anger at James, and a growing uneasiness about what utilizing available family resources might actually mean. 3 days passed with no further family discussions. I used the time to finalize details with the Art Institute in Florence, confirm my flight arrangements, and continue organizing my studio. Clara had stopped by to measure spaces for her own furniture, her excitement a welcome counterpoint to the heaviness of Rebecca's situation. The doorbell rang just as I was cataloging brushes to take versus leave behind. Through the window, I spotted my parents' car and Rebecca's minivan in my driveway. No warning call, no text message asking if I was available. The spontaneous family visit sent a wave of apprehension through me. We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by, Mom announced cheerfully as I opened the door. This was transparently untrue. My neighborhood was nowhere near any place my parents would normally visit. Rebecca trailed behind with Emma, Liam, and Charlotte in tow. The children appeared subdued, unusual for their typically boisterous personalities. My father carried a measuring tape, which he absently slipped into his pocket when he saw me notice it. What a surprise, I managed, stepping aside to let them enter. I was just working on some projects. Perfect timing, then, Dad replied with forced joviality. We've been brainstorming about Rebecca's situation, and we had an idea we wanted to discuss with you in person. Mom was already moving through my living room with appraising eyes, noting the packed boxes I'd begun assembling for storage. Spring cleaning? She asked, though we were firmly in autumn. Just organizing some things, I answered vaguely, watching as my father guided everyone toward the back door that led to my studio. An unsettled feeling grew in my stomach. "Children, be careful not to touch anything," Rebecca cautioned as they entered my sacred creative space. Liam immediately reached for a set of carved wooden stamps on a nearby shelf. "This is quite spacious," Dad commented, eyes scanning the room with calculation rather than appreciation. "Much bigger than it looks from outside." Mom nodded enthusiastically. "And such wonderful light. All these windows." They walked the perimeter of my studio with the deliberate assessment of property developers rather than visitors. Dad pulled out his measuring tape again, stretching it across the width of the room while Mom opened the supply closet I'd custom built. "What exactly are you doing?" I finally asked, confusion giving way to a creeping dread. They exchanged that. "Look again," the one from the family meeting, before Mom placed her hand on my arm. "Sweetie, we've come up with the perfect solution for Rebecca's housing crisis," she announced. "Your studio would make an ideal temporary living space for her and the children." The words hit me like cold water. "My studio? It makes perfect sense," Dad continued, enthusiasm building. "With some minor modifications, this could easily accommodate a bed for Rebecca and bunk beds for the older two. Charlotte's crib could go by the north wall. The plumbing is already in place for a small bathroom addition," Mom added, gesturing toward my utility sink. "James left them with practically nothing, and this would give them breathing room to rebuild." Rebecca stood awkwardly by the door, not meeting my eyes. The children had grown bored with the adult conversation and were now exploring my supplies with increasing boldness. Charlotte had found a container of polymer clay and was squeezing colorful lumps between her fingers. "But this is my workspace," I said, struggling to process their proposal. "Everything I do, my entire career, happens here." "Well, yes," Mom acknowledged with a dismissive wave. "But you have the whole house. You could easily set up a corner in your spare bedroom for your hobby." "My hobby?" The word stung like a slap. "This isn't a hobby. This is my profession, my livelihood." Dad sighed with the patient condescension he reserved for what he considered unreasonable behavior. "Olivia, we're talking about your sister and 3 innocent children who have nowhere to go. Surely your art projects can be put on hold temporarily." "Art projects?" I repeated numbly, watching as Liam picked up one of my expensive sable brushes. "It would just be for a few months," Rebecca finally spoke, her voice small, "until I can find a job that actually pays enough for an apartment." I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. "I understand Rebecca needs help, and I want to support her. But there's something you don't know. I'm not just traveling. Soon, I've been accepted to a year-long residency program in Florence. I leave in 3 weeks." Instead of recognition or congratulations, my announcement was met with blank stares followed by scoffs of disbelief. "Florence? Italy?" Dad clarified. "You're planning to abandon your job and home to paint in Italy? At a time like this?" "I'm not abandoning anything," I countered, feeling defensive. "This is a prestigious opportunity that could define my career. Artists compete globally for these positions." Mom exchanged a meaningful glance with Rebecca before turning back to me. "Honey, we understand you enjoy your painting, but this is real life with real responsibilities. Your sister has 3 children who need a safe place to live. And I need to pursue my career," I insisted, feeling increasingly cornered. "This isn't an impulse decision. I've been working toward this opportunity for years." "But you can paint anywhere," Dad argued. "Italy will still be there after Rebecca gets back on her feet." The casual dismissal of years of dedicated work, of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, ignited something in me. Would you tell a doctor to put their medical career on hold? Or an engineer to just set aside their projects? Why is my profession so easily disposable in your eyes? "That's different," Mom replied immediately. "How? How is it different?" "Because those are established careers with stability and benefits," Dad explained as if speaking to a child. "Your painting is wonderful, but it's not a dependable livelihood. The irony was bitter. They had no idea that my undependable art had recently sold for more than Dad made in 3 months. But I'd stopped sharing my successes after years of minimizing responses. Charlotte had now wandered to my latest canvas, fingers dangerously close to the still-drying surface. Rebecca made no move to redirect her. "Look," Mom said with forced patience, "we've given this a lot of thought. You could stay in our basement for a few months. We'd clear out the holiday decorations. By the time you get back from your trip, Rebecca might have found her own place. Or," Dad added, "you could just postpone this Italy thing until next year. Family comes first, Olivia." The implied message was clear. My dreams were optional luxuries while Rebecca's needs constituted real priorities. It was a familiar dynamic stretching back to childhood, when my art lessons were expendable when money got tight, but Rebecca's soccer tournaments remained sacrosanct. "I need time to think about this," I finally said, carefully extracting my paintbrush from Liam's grip. "There isn't much time," Mom pressed. "Rebecca needs to be out of her house by the end of the month. We thought we could start moving some of your art supplies to storage this weekend." The casual presumption stunned me into silence. They had not only decided my studio would be sacrificed, but had already planned the logistics without my consent. "We should go," Rebecca suddenly announced, gathering her children. "Thanks for considering this, Liv. I know it's a lot to ask." Her voice held a strange mixture of entitlement and genuine gratitude. As they filed out, Dad paused at the door. "Family pulls together in crisis, Olivia. Your mother and I have always taught you girls that." I stood alone in my studio after they left, surrounded by the creative space I'd built with my own hands, now mentally partitioned into bedrooms and play areas in my family's imagination. The silence felt hostile, filled with unspoken expectations, and the weight of decisions not yet made but somehow already determined. Sleep evaded me that night as conversations with my family replayed in endless loops. Each mental replay revealed new layers of disrespect I hadn't fully processed in the moment. By dawn, I sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cooling mug of tea, torn between lifelong family loyalty and the fierce protection of the future I'd worked so hard to create. The morning light gradually filled my studio as I wandered through it, touching tools and materials that had become extensions of myself. This space represented not just physical resources, but years of persistence through doubt and criticism. Here, I'd created the collection that finally earned critical recognition. Here, I'd received the email accepting me to the Florence program, while crying tears of vindication. Memories surfaced of similar patterns throughout childhood, Rebecca's needs consistently prioritized over mine. When college acceptance letters arrived, my parents hosted a lavish dinner celebrating Rebecca's business school scholarship, but merely nodded at my art school admission with cautionary warnings about practical backup plans. When I purchased this house, they questioned my financial decision while giving Rebecca and James a substantial down payment for their larger home as a wedding gift. The phone interrupted my thoughts, Mia calling to finalize plans for helping me pack. "They want." "To do what?" she exclaimed after I explained yesterday's ambush. "Your studio? The one you built from nothing while working double shifts? That studio?" "They don't see it as particularly important," I admitted, the words still stinging. "Mom called it my hobby and suggested I could set up in a bedroom corner instead." "After your show sold out? After your pieces were featured in American Artist?" Mia's indignation felt like a balm. "Have you told them about Florence yet?" I tried. Dad called it this Italy thing and suggested postponing it for a year. Mia's exasperated sigh carried through the phone. "This is exactly why you didn't tell them sooner. They've never respected your art as a real career." "Rebecca is in a genuine crisis," I acknowledged, feeling the pull of conflicting loyalties. "She has 3 children and nowhere to go." "Your parents have a 4-bedroom house with just the 2 of them," Mia countered. "Why aren't they offering their space? Why is your career the automatic sacrifice?" The question crystallized something I'd been unable to articulate. Despite their claims about family pulling together, the proposed solution involved only my sacrifice while they maintained their comfortable status quo. "You know what this really is," Mia continued, when I didn't respond. "It's about control. They never wanted you to be an artist, and this is their chance to pull you back into their vision for your life." As difficult as it was to admit, her words resonated with truth. My parents had consistently undermined my artistic path with subtle, and not so subtle tactics, highlighting newspaper stories about struggling artists, sending job listings for graphic design positions with reliable paychecks, expressing concern about my retirement planning. My phone pinged with an email notification. The Florence program coordinator confirming my studio assignment and sending orientation details. The timing felt significant, a reminder of what awaited. If I held firm. Another call came that afternoon, this time from Clara, my soon-to-be tenant. "Just wanted to confirm I can drop off some boxes next week. My renovation timeline got moved up, and I might need to move in a few days earlier than planned if that works for you." The conversation cemented the reality of my commitments. Clara had signed a legal lease. She had already given notice on her current apartment. My verbal agreement with her carried both legal and ethical weight that couldn't be casually dismissed for family convenience. I decided to call Rebecca directly, hoping for a sister-to-sister conversation without our parents' influencing presence. After 4 rings, her voicemail answered. I left a message asking her to call back to discuss options, trying to infuse my voice with supportive concern rather than the frustration simmering beneath. The next morning brought more emails from Florence, with visa confirmation and apartment details. As I reviewed these documents, my phone rang with my parents' number. "Great news," Mom announced without preamble. "Your father found someone interested in buying your larger equipment. That pottery wheel thing and the big easel. They can pick them up next Monday." The casual announcement of plans to sell my possessions without consultation left me momentarily speechless. "What are you talking about?" I finally managed. "You can't sell my equipment." "Well, it would have to go somewhere," she explained with strained patience. "There's no room in our basement for the larger pieces, and Rebecca will need the space." Cleared. The money could help with her first month's rent when she finds a new place. The presumption that my decision had already been made ignited something beyond frustration. "Mom, stop. I haven't agreed to any of this. You can't sell things that belong to me." "Olivia Jean," she replied, using my middle name as she always did when disapproving of my behavior. "We assumed you'd have the basic family loyalty to help your sister in her time of need. Rebecca has been crying all night thinking about where her children will sleep next month." The emotional manipulation was familiar, but no less effective. Guilt flooded through me despite my rational understanding of the situation. "I want to help Rebecca," I insisted, "but converting my studio isn't the only solution. What about the finished basement at your house, or using the money from my equipment to help her rent an apartment directly? You know very well your father uses that basement for his model trains," she dismissed. "And a short-term rental would just waste money Rebecca doesn't have. Your studio is the perfect transitional space until she receives her divorce settlement." The conversation continued in circles, with every alternative I suggested immediately rejected for increasingly trivial reasons. It became painfully clear that they had fixated on my studio as the only acceptable solution, regardless of the impact on my life and career. After hanging up, I found myself shaking with a mixture of anger and anxiety. The walls of my carefully constructed life felt like they were closing in, family expectations squeezing out the future I'd planned. The pressure to acquiesce, to be the good daughter who sacrificed without complaint, pushed against my hard-won, professional identity. In that moment of clarity, I realized I faced a fundamental choice: continue the pattern of yielding my needs to family demands, or finally establish boundaries that honored my own life path. Neither option felt clean or simple. Both would exact emotional costs, I wasn't sure I was prepared to pay. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. Your mother and I will be over tomorrow morning with boxes. Rebecca found some children's furniture at a consignment shop. The casual presumption that my consent was unnecessary crystallized my resolve. This wasn't just about a physical space. It was about whether my life choices deserved respect. If I surrendered now, I would be accepting their fundamental belief that my career was optional, insignificant, and disposable. I took a deep breath and began drafting a response I knew would forever change my family dynamics. Despite my carefully worded text explaining I needed more time to consider options, my parents' SUV and Rebecca's minivan pulled into my driveway precisely at 9 the next morning. Through my front window, I watched them unload cardboard boxes, cleaning supplies, and what appeared to be a partially disassembled child's bed frame. The children spilled from the minivan with the pent-up energy of kids who'd been promised a new adventure. Opening the door before they knocked, I found myself facing my father's surprised expression, arms loaded with flattened moving boxes. We thought we'd get an early start, he explained, brushing past me into the house. Mom followed with a determined smile, pulling on rubber gloves as if preparing for a deep cleaning operation. I texted that I needed more time, I pointed out, watching helplessly as they established beachheads of boxes and supplies throughout my living room. Time isn't a luxury Rebecca has right now, Mom replied, already opening my hall closet to assess its contents. The foreclosure process waits for no one. Rebecca entered last, shepherding her children while avoiding my gaze. Emma and Liam immediately raced toward my studio door with the instinctive radar children possess for forbidden spaces. Charlotte toddled after them, a stuffed bunny clutched in one hand. Kids, please be careful in there, Rebecca called without making any actual move to supervise them. Following the children into my studio, I found Liam already climbing the shelving unit where I stored delicate handmade papers, while Emma investigated the drawers containing my organized brush collection. Those aren't toys, I said firmly, gently guiding Liam down. There are very expensive and fragile things in here. Well, they'll need to get used to the space, Mom commented, entering behind me. This will be their bedroom soon, though we'll need to use strong cleaners on everything. All these art chemicals can't be healthy for growing lungs. The casual dismissal of both my property and my imminent protest ignited something deep within me. Years of swallowed responses and acquiescence crystallized into a sudden, unshakable clarity. No, I said, the word hanging in the air with unexpected weight. Mom paused her inspection of the window locks. No what? No. This will not be their bedroom. This is my professional studio, and it's not available for conversion. Dad appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting from confusion to the paternal disappointment he'd weaponized throughout my childhood. Olivia, we've been through this. Your sister has nowhere else to go. That's not true, I countered, my voice steadier than I felt. There are alternatives we haven't properly explored because everyone immediately fixated on my space. Rebecca had entered silently, hovering near the door. Charlotte had discovered my water cup used for rinsing brushes and was now dipping her fingers into the colored water. Charlotte, no. I moved quickly to redirect her, but not before several drops of paint-infused water splashed onto a canvas I'd been working on for the Florence portfolio. She's just a baby, Rebecca defended immediately. She doesn't understand. Exactly, I agreed. Which is why this space isn't appropriate for children. My livelihood depends on these materials, and works in progress, Mom made a dismissive sound. You're being dramatic. Children adapt quickly, and they'll learn boundaries. The irony of my boundary-resistant family lecturing about boundaries might have been amusing in another context. At that moment, it only fueled my determination. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being practical. This space represents years of investment and the foundation of my career. More importantly, I've already committed it to someone else. What do you mean committed it? Dad's voice sharpened. The moment had arrived sooner than I'd planned. Taking a deep breath, I laid out the truth I'd been protecting. I've accepted a year-long residency at the Bertolini Institute in Florence, Italy. It's one of the most prestigious programs for mid-career artists in the world. My flight leaves in 18 days, and I've already leased this entire house to Clara Winters, a local art teacher whose apartment building is being renovated. She signed the papers last week and paid 3 months in advance. The silence that followed felt physical, as if all the oxygen had suddenly been pulled from the room. Emma and Liam, sensing the adult tension, froze in their explorations. "You did what?" Mom finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You heard me. The house is leased starting next month. It's a legally binding agreement." Dad's face flushed with the particular shade of red reserved for when his authority was directly challenged. "You made this decision without consulting your family, when you knew your sister was in crisis." "I made these plans before James left," I clarified. "And yes, I made this decision about my career and my property independently, as any adult would." Rebecca suddenly burst into tears, collapsing onto my work stool. "What am I supposed to do now? Live in my car with 3 kids?" The emotional escalation was so immediate and practiced that I recognized it as the familiar family pattern. Someone expresses a boundary, Rebecca cries. Everyone rushes to soothe her while casting blame on the boundary setter. "Nobody is going to live in a car," I said firmly. "But my studio isn't the only possible solution here." "How could you be so selfish?" Mom demanded, pulling Charlotte onto her hip in a protective gesture. "These are your own flesh and blood. It's not selfish to honor my commitments and pursue my career," I countered, struggling to maintain my composure. "Would you ask Rebecca to give up her home for me if the situation were reversed?" "That's completely different," Dad interjected. "She has children to consider." "And I have a life to consider," I insisted. "One that I've built with hard work and sacrifice while receiving very little support from any of you." "Support?" Mom's voice rose. "We've supported you through all these artistic phases, waiting patiently for you to settle into something practical. We didn't complain when you chose art school instead of business like your sister. We didn't even say 'I told you so' when you struggled for years to sell anything." The raw truth of their perspective hit harder than expected. They had genuinely been tolerating my career rather than respecting it, viewing my artistic path as a prolonged rebellion rather than a legitimate profession. "My artistic phases paid for this house," I responded quietly. "My last gallery show grossed more than Dad makes in a quarter. The paintings you've dismissed as hobbies have been acquired by major collectors and reviewed in national publications. But you've never once asked about my successes because you decided years ago that my choices weren't valid." Rebecca's crying intensified, drawing the children's attention. Emma moved to her mother's side, patting her arm with practiced concern that spoke volumes about their home dynamic. "So that's it?" Dad demanded. "Your fancy Italian painting vacation matters more than your sister's welfare?" "That's not what I said. I've offered financial help. I've suggested alternative living arrangements. I've proposed using my rental income to subsidize an apartment for Rebecca. You've rejected every option except the one that completely disregards my needs and commitments." "Because those options aren't practical," Mom exclaimed. "Rebecca needs stability, not handouts. And I need my family to respect that my life and choices have value too," I countered, feeling a lifetime of pent-up frustration rising to the surface. Liam had wandered to the window, suddenly pointing outside. "Who's that lady?" Following his gaze, I spotted Clara's blue compact car pulling into my driveway. The timing couldn't have been worse, or perhaps more clarifying. "That's Clara Winters," I explained, moving toward the door. "My tenant. She's dropping off some paperwork today." "You actually went through with this lease without telling us?" Dad's disbelief had morphed into cold anger. "Yes, because it's my house and my decision to make." The fundamental divide between our perspectives stretched like an unbridgeable chasm. In their worldview, Independent adult children remained ultimately answerable to family authority and collective needs. In mine, respect flowed both ways, with each person's path holding inherent validity. "I can't believe you would abandon your sister like this," Mom said, her voice trembling with what sounded like genuine bewilderment. "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm maintaining boundaries about what I can and cannot offer." Rebecca finally looked up, her tear-stained face hardening. "You've always been selfish, Olivia. Always focused on your precious art while the rest of us lived in the real world with real responsibilities. Now, when I need you most, you're running off to Italy without a second thought." The accusation stung despite my intellectual understanding of the dynamic at play. "That's not fair, and it's not true." "Isn't it?" she challenged. "When have you ever put family first? When have you ever sacrificed something you wanted for someone else's needs?" Before I could respond, Clara knocked at the front door. The sound echoed through the tense silence like a gavel falling. "I should get that," I said quietly. "Don't bother," Dad replied, gathering his keys from the counter. "We're leaving. Come on, Rebecca. Clearly your sister has made her choice." The speed with which they collected children and belongings held a practiced efficiency. This was not their first dramatic exit from a conflict. Rebecca herded the confused children while Mom gathered the cleaning supplies they'd brought. Dad paused at the door, turning back with an expression that mixed anger with something that looked surprisingly like fear. "Family is supposed to be there for each other no matter what," he said. "I never thought I'd see the day when my daughter would choose paint and canvas over flesh and blood." The door closed behind them with decisive finality. Through the window, I watched them load into their vehicles, noted the animated conversation between my parents, observed Rebecca's slumped posture in the passenger seat of the minivan. As they pulled away, Clara approached cautiously from her parked car, clearly sensing she'd arrived during a tense moment. Standing alone in my living room surrounded by the boxes they'd brought to pack away my career, I felt the weight of their disappointment pressing against the certainty of my decision. Though logically justified, emotionally the moment felt like a seismic rupture in my family's foundation, the day I finally refused to be the designated sacrifice. The slam of car doors and retreat of engines left an unnatural stillness in my home. Clara's hesitant knock finally broke the silence. "Is this a bad time?" she asked when I opened the door, her perceptive eyes taking in my shaken appearance. "I can come back later if you need." "No, please come in," I managed, grateful for her presence as an anchor to reality outside my family drama. "Just had a difficult conversation with my family." Clara nodded with understanding beyond her words as she stepped inside. Family has a unique talent for finding our most vulnerable spots, doesn't it? We spent the next hour reviewing final lease, details and her move-in timeline, the mundane practicalities providing a welcome respite from emotional turmoil. Clara's excitement about using the studio space offered a poignant contrast to my family's dismissal of its importance. "This north light is a painter's dream," she remarked while signing the updated agreement. "I can't believe I'll be working in this space for a year. My students will be so inspired when I host small workshops here." Her words validated what my family couldn't see, that this wasn't just a room with art supplies, but a purpose-built, creative sanctuary with genuine value beyond its square footage. After Clara left, I stood alone in my studio, examining the paintings and sculptures that represented years of persistent vision despite continuous discouragement. Each piece held memories of late nights, technical breakthroughs, and quiet moments of creative flow that had sustained me through doubt. This space had witnessed my transformation from hesitant hobbyist to confident professional artist. The thought of dismantling it for bunk beds and cribs felt like erasing not just a workspace, but a critical part of my identity. The days following the confrontation unfolded in uncomfortable silence. No calls from my parents, no texts from Rebecca. Social media showed my sister had updated her status to vague posts about discovering who really stands by you in hard times. garnering sympathetic comments from mutual acquaintances unaware of the full situation. Mia and two other close friends helped me finalize packing, their supportive presence a balm against family silence. We carefully wrapped finished works for storage, organized supplies that would stay for Clara's use, and prepared my portfolio for Florence. "They'll come around," Mia assured me while wrapping a ceramic sculpture in bubble wrap. "Once the emotional heat dissipates, they'll see you've actually offered reasonable alternatives." "I'm not sure," I replied, remembering my father's expression, "at the door." This feels different from our usual disagreements. I've never directly refused something they considered non-negotiable before. "That's exactly why this is important," she insisted. "You're establishing that your life choices deserve the same respect as Rebecca's. The theoretical righteousness provided little comfort during sleepless nights when doubts crept in. Had I been unnecessarily rigid? Could I have found a compromise? The weight of lifelong family expectations pressed against my newfound boundaries like water testing a dam. 5 days after the confrontation, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. Through the peephole, I saw Rebecca standing alone on my porch, arms crossed protectively across her chest. "Can we talk?" she asked when I opened the door, her voice lacking the accusatory edge from our last encounter. We settled awkwardly at my kitchen table, two sisters connected by blood and history, but separated by fundamentally different life approaches. The afternoon light caught the new lines of stress around her eyes, reminding me that beneath the family drama was genuine pain. "Mom and Dad don't know I'm here," she began, declining my offer of tea. "They're still pretty upset." "I gathered that from the silence," I acknowledged. Rebecca traced the wood grain of the table with one finger, avoiding eye contact. "I've been thinking about what you said, about always being expected to sacrifice your needs while no one questions mine." The admission surprised me. Rebecca had rarely demonstrated self-reflection about our family's dynamics. "It's not that I don't appreciate their support," I clarified, "or that I don't want to help you. It's just, you want the help to be on reasonable terms," she finished unexpectedly, "not completely dismantling your life." The simple acknowledgement of my perspective felt momentous after years of having it dismissed. "James always said I was spoiled," she continued, a flash of pain crossing her face at mentioning her estranged husband. "During our last fight, he said I'd never faced real consequences for anything because someone always rescued me. I hated him for saying it, but maybe there's some truth there." I reached across the table, briefly touching her hand. "What's happening to you is terrible, Rebecca. You don't deserve any of this." "No, but that doesn't mean everyone else is responsible for fixing it either." She finally met my eyes directly. "I was jealous when you bought this house. Did you know that? Even though ours was bigger and in a better neighborhood, I was jealous because you did it completely on your own." The confession created a small opening in the wall that had long existed between us. "I've always been jealous of your confidence," I admitted in return. "The way you never seem to question your path or choices." A mirthless laugh escaped her. "Well, that confidence was clearly misplaced considering where I am now." We sat in surprisingly comfortable silence for a moment before Rebecca spoke again. "Mom found some information about a transitional housing program for women with children. 2-bedroom apartments with sliding scale rent based on income. I have an interview next week." "That sounds promising." "It's not ideal. The location means changing schools for the kids, but it would be our own space." She hesitated before adding, "Your offer of financial help would make a huge difference with the security deposit if it's still available." "Of course it is," I assured her. "And once Clara starts paying rent, I can direct some of that toward your housing costs too." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but unlike her previous emotional displays, these seemed born of genuine gratitude rather than manipulation. "I don't deserve your help after how I acted. You're still my sister," I said simply. "That hasn't changed." As we continued talking, subtle shifts occurred in our interaction. Rebecca asked questions about Florence and actually listened to my answers. I inquired about her job prospects without offering unsolicited advice. For perhaps the first time in our adult lives, we spoke as two independent women facing different challenges rather than as competitors for family approval. "I should go," she eventually said, checking her phone. "The babysitter can only stay until 5. At the door, she paused. "Mom and Dad might take longer to come around. They've had a very fixed idea about how family works for a long time." "I know," I acknowledged. "But maybe this forces some new conversations we've needed to have for years?" "Maybe," she agreed without conviction. "For what it's worth, your art studio is really beautiful. I hope Italy helps you create even more amazing work." The simple acknowledgement of my professional space brought unexpected emotion to my throat. "Thank you. That means a lot." As Rebecca's car disappeared down the street, I felt something shift inside me. Not a complete resolution of family tensions, but the first tentative steps toward a more authentic relationship with my sister. One based on mutual respect, rather than prescribed roles and expectations. The wall between us had developed its first meaningful crack, allowing light to pass through in both directions. My final day in the studio arrived with bittersweet intensity. Each corner held memories of creative breakthroughs and late-night inspirations. I'd spent the morning photographing the empty space, not for practical documentation, but as emotional closure on this chapter of my artistic journey. Clara would move in officially tomorrow, bringing her own creative energy to these walls. We'd developed a comfortable rapport during her visits to measure spaces and plan furniture arrangement. Her excitement about teaching small workshops in the studio had gradually replaced my concerns about leaving my sanctuary in someone else's hands. "You've created such beautiful energy in this space," she'd commented during her last visit. "I promise to honor it while you're gone." The doorbell interrupted my reflections. Through the window, I spotted my parents' car in the driveway, its presence both surprising and anxiety-inducing after 2 weeks of silence. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door to find them standing awkwardly on the porch, expressions unreadable. "We come in?" Dad asked formally, as though visiting a stranger's home. "Of course," I replied, stepping aside. They entered cautiously, surveying the packed boxes and emptied shelves with carefully neutral expressions. Mom clutched her purse tightly against her body like armor. "Rebecca told us she came to see you," Mom began after declining my offer of coffee. "She said you're helping with her security deposit at the new place." "Yes," I confirmed simply. Dad cleared his throat. "We've been reflecting on our reaction to your Italy plans." The uncharacteristic admission hung in the air between us. "Rebecca's situation triggered some deeply held beliefs about family obligations," Mom continued carefully. "Perhaps we imposed expectations without fully considering your perspective." Coming from my parents, this qualified acknowledgement represented seismic movement in our relationship. Neither offered a direct apology, but the implicit recognition of overstepping felt momentous. "I understand why you wanted to help Rebecca," I offered, extending my own olive branch. "And I do want to support her, just not by abandoning my own path." Dad nodded slowly. "Your sister mentioned your art has been more successful than we realized." The understatement almost made me laugh. For years, I'd stopped sharing professional milestones after too many dismissive responses. "I brought something to show you," I said, retrieving a folder from my desk. Inside was a feature article from American Artist magazine highlighting my recent exhibition, alongside reviews from respected critics and the acceptance letter from the Florence program. They reviewed these materials with visible surprise, exchanging glances as they absorbed evidence of the professional success they'd never bothered to investigate. "Why didn't you tell us about all this?" Mom asked, genuine confusion in her voice. I tried, many times. But my achievements were always minimized as nice hobbies rather than professional accomplishments. Eventually, I stopped sharing. The Uncomfortable truth settled between us like a physical presence. We may not have... Dad paused, searching for words. Fully appreciated the seriousness of your artistic career. Coming from him, this represented a monumental concession. Rebecca will be okay, Mom added, changing direction. The transitional housing program actually offers financial counseling and career development services. It might be better for her independence than moving into your studio would have been. The irony wasn't lost on any of us that the solution most respectful of everyone's boundaries had been available all along, but overlooked in favor of the more convenient option of sacrificing my needs. When do you leave? Dad asked, gesturing toward my packed suitcases. Tomorrow evening. Clara moves in during the morning, and my flight to Florence is at 8. Another exchange of glances between them before Mom spoke. Would you mind if we drove you to the airport? It would give us a chance to talk more. The simple request represented more than transportation logistics. It was an acknowledgement of my journey's importance, a small step toward recognizing my career as legitimate. I'd appreciate that, I accepted, surprised by the emotion tightening my throat. The conversation shifted to practical details about Florence, where I'd be living, the focus of my artistic research, the Institute's reputation. For perhaps the first time, they asked questions that treated my work as a serious professional endeavor rather than a temporary diversion before real life began. As they prepared to leave, Dad paused at the studio doorway, surveying the space with new eyes. You built all this yourself? Every shelf, every workstation, I confirmed. Learned plumbing from YouTube videos to install the utility sink. Something like respect flickered across his face. That's actually quite impressive, Olivia. The simple acknowledgement of effort and skill, something I'd unconsciously sought for years, landed with unexpected impact. We'll pick you up tomorrow at 5, Mom confirmed at the door. That should give plenty of time for airport security. After they left, I stood in my emptied studio, processing the subtle but significant shift in family dynamics. Not a complete resolution or a perfect understanding, but movement towards something more balanced and honest. The next morning brought Clara with her collection of art books and teaching supplies. We completed the official handover of keys amid excited conversation about her plans for the space. The light in here is even better than I remembered, she enthused. My students will be so inspired. I'm glad it will still be used for creating art, I replied, running my hand along the workbench one last time. It would have broken my heart to see it converted to something else. Creative spaces have souls, Clara nodded with understanding. This one will be waiting for your return. By 5 o'clock, my parents arrived punctually to drive me to the airport. Rebecca had come too, with handmade cards from the children wishing me good luck in Italy. The awkwardness hadn't disappeared entirely, but beneath it flowed tentative currents of new respect. At the terminal drop-off, Mom hugged me with unexpected fierceness. We're proud of you, she whispered. The words I'd unconsciously longed to hear for decades. Dad helped with my luggage before offering his own embrace. Your studio will be waiting when you get back, he said simply. And so will we. The goodbye held none of the recrimination I'd feared, replaced instead by a fragile but genuine acknowledgement of my chosen path. Settling into my seat as the plane prepared for takeoff, I opened my sketchbook to capture swirling emotions before they faded. The page gradually filled with imagery, reflecting not just the physical journey ahead, but the emotional distance traveled in standing firm for my own needs while maintaining family bonds. 3 weeks later, from my small apartment in Florence, I video called home. Rebecca answered from her new transitional housing apartment, the background showing modest but personalized space. The kids are adjusting well to the new school, she reported, and I've started paralegal training through the housing program's career services. That's wonderful, I encouraged, genuinely happy for her emerging independence. Mom and Dad visited yesterday. Dad actually hung some of your paintings I had stored in my garage. said the place needed real art on the walls. The small gesture spoke volumes about evolving perspectives. As I ended the call and turned toward the window overlooking terracotta rooftops, the Italian sunset painted the sky in colors I was eager to capture on canvas. The distance from home had created space not just for artistic growth, but for family relationships to reshape themselves into healthier patterns. In standing firm about my studio and career, I hadn't destroyed family bonds as I'd feared. Instead, I'd established a foundation for more authentic connections based on mutual respect rather than prescribed obligations. The temporary pain of confrontation had yielded a precious gift, relationships that honored each person's individual journey while maintaining loving connections. Family love, I was learning, shouldn't require the sacrifice of personal dreams. True family support means celebrating each member's unique path, rather than enforcing a single definition of success or obligation. Sometimes the most loving act isn't acquiescence, but honest boundary setting that allows everyone's light to shine fully. Have you ever had to stand up for your dreams against family pressure? Did standing firm ultimately strengthen or weaken your relationships? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life lessons on navigating complicated family dynamics while honoring your own path. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to create the life that truly honors your gifts.